Ladies and gentlemen of AI news, drama, and updates, welcome to the future. We're looking at robot dogs in India. This is the future soldier that's meant to climb the Himalayas or in otherwise traverse areas that are, really snowy or otherwise like difficult to carry things around. But they're also set up to be able to fire guns. So this is the first instance that I think I've seen of an actual robot military member. And it looks like the country of India is going to be the first to get started. India, you might also remember, is the first country to take a no-nonsense, anti-regulation stance in the world of AI. So this is interesting development, and we're going to have to obviously continue to keep an eye on this to see how things progress. Now, while these things don't exactly look stealthy, I wouldn't trust this with an assassination mission. This is definitely an instance of something that isn't human and could be used for a variety of different alternative purposes. And it would seem to me that seeing technologies like this start to come to fruition and start to be used more and more for military applications is going to require our military to potentially develop defenses that also utilize AI technologies as well. Now, whether or not they purposely put the sensors on the front of this thing's little face to give it this cute little eyes and mouth appearance, I don't know if that was by design or by accident, but it is an interesting look. It's not exactly Wall-E and it's not exactly terrifying, some a little bit in between. But if that makes you uncomfortable, rest assured the world's richest people are getting together to determine what you can and can't do in the future with AI. The people you're seeing on screen here, the companies that essentially run the world in terms of AI. We have Bill Gates representing Microsoft as well as the actual CEO of Microsoft. Clement from Hugging Face, which stores most of the models that we're using nowadays. But we also have, of course, Google's presence. Elon Musk is there for x.ai. And for Meta, we have Mark Zuckerberg. While I haven't exactly seen what's come out of this meeting so far, the intent and purpose behind all of this is to decide, again, what you are going to be able to do in the future, where we go in the world of AI regulation. And just like the rest of the United States, it's going to be the companies and the people that have the money that essentially rule the world. Switching over to the Ars Technica coverage of this specific article, you can see that 14 of the 22 people that attended here were CEOs. And that's not really a fair representation of what the real world is like. Especially right now, as we're existing more and more so in a world where labor is getting more power. We've got the writer's strike going on, we've got an auto worker strike looming, and we've even got truckers that have striked recently. Due to the combination of COVID, work from home policies, plus the AI boom, we're seeing a lot of companies having a tumultuous time and actually struggling to maintain power. And so yeah, throughout this, you're going to hear a ton about AI safety and things like that, but I'll remind you that no one's been hurt by AI just yet. Now, you yourself might be wondering, when is it my turn to get to vote on something like this? And I don't know that you'll have that opportunity. It looks like a lot of the representatives that we've voted into place are making those decisions for us with these companies, essentially just making deals on the back end. One of the oddest things that I think you'll notice here is how oddly bipartisan this actually is. Because this actually affects capital and not directly people, it interests everybody. And everybody who is rich is interested in staying rich. So that's why all of these folks are working together. Now, Elon Musk, who was part of OpenAI, who's no longer part of OpenAI, who bought x.ai and is starting Truth.gpt, he suggested that there needed to be a referee of some sort, where Zuckerberg took a different approach, and he suggested a more collaborative approach between companies and the government. The long and short of it here is I don't believe any decisions were officially made here. I don't see anything that's happened just yet. But of course, when it happens, when anything changes, keep an eye on the channel and I'll let you know. And while meetings like this are a step towards regulatory framework that's going to lay out the future of AI, the only things that are actually in place right now are the voluntary commitments that were made. And it looks like Adobe, IBM, and NVIDIA just recently announced that they were going to jump on those voluntary commitments as well. And we talked about those in a past video. If it sounds like I'm only talking about really big billion-dollar companies, that's because that really seems to be all that anyone's talking about here. I am, of course, very concerned with how much of this conversation is about individual users, the rights that you have, the freedoms that you have. But speaking of change, let's switch gears for a moment and talk about Microsoft. Now, just like Adobe, Microsoft is offering a legal protection of sorts. If you got sued for copyright because you decided to use Adobe Firefly, Adobe is offered to cover the costs of that. Microsoft is doing something similar with anything that's involved its AI as well. So I'd imagine that would cover anything that's come through Bing, anything that's come through Copilot, potentially even things that come through DALL-E. Microsoft at this point has a much wider array of AI-based services. So it's a really interesting move here from Microsoft because I'm not sure how much in demand something like this was, but it should offer some kind of peace of mind for companies or individuals who were kind of on the fence about potentially using AI because of the legal threats that have been out there. The only caveat Microsoft's put in place here is as long as you don't disable the safeguards and content filters, things that they've put in place, they will cover everything here. Whether or not this is going to result in more or less lawsuits, we'll have to kind of see how that plays out. And I'll end this particular subject by actually paying attention to the last paragraph here. It looks like Ars Technica did some digging to try to find the status of that class action lawsuit against GitHub, and they weren't able to find that the thing is still active using public records. So that may have gotten closed, it may have gotten settled. I don't know just yet, and I don't want to make any assumptions, so we'll keep an eye on that to see if anyone else has found anything about that. But I've been waiting for an update on that, and whether that was settled or dismissed, maybe that was the update. I'm not sure. So, more to come. In a cute little subject I wanted to call the AI invasion, we've got the Stable Diffusion graphics kind of making their way into the real world. Coca-Cola had this clever marketing idea with Coca-Cola 3000. The concept is basically like, we want Coke to still be around in the year 3000. What's that going to look like? How's it going to taste? So they used AI technology to kind of dream up some solutions. Specifically, Stable Diffusion was mentioned here. The article talks a little bit about Stable Diffusion and the history and the tumultuous backing and blah, 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 but the focal point here is really the art and the graphics that have come out of it, and also this little app that they put together, because it looks like you can kind of take a picture of different things and then, use this Cokify filter or whatever you want to call it. And it gives this futuristic purplish kind of look, something, it looks like it's using image to image. It is kind of weirdly unclear as to how they're putting this mystery flavor together, somehow using AI and user input. But I would imagine Coke is eventually going to create some kind of safe beverage that you can try. It does look like there's going to be Coke available to drink for a limited time in this special zero sugar version of an AI augmented soda. So if you're interested in trying that, it's available for a limited time in select markets. But it looks like it will come first to the US and Canada. And of course, there's going to be an original taste version of Coca-Cola Y3000 soon. But if you didn't feel like your world was AI saturated enough, Amazon is now encouraging its sellers to use AI generated product listings. Amazon is leaning into a lot of the generative AI tools that it's been developing on the back end. And it's going to allow people who are selling things on Amazon to basically click a button and generate descriptions. And this should really be no surprise because similar technologies are going to be coming to major platforms like this as well. I'm sure it's not going to be very long before we see automatic video descriptions through YouTube, for example. So while I can't really speak on the quality of what these AI-generated content descriptions will look like, I can certainly say that I've seen some odd ones before when they're handwritten. Hopefully, these will be better. Hopefully it's not garbage, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. This is a technology that actually joins up with something we didn't really talk about before, but I'll take a moment to talk about it now. And what you're seeing here are AI-generated summaries, which is a cool little subsystem. It takes a look at all the different reviews for a product and kind of finds trends or different ideas, different words and concepts that are popular, and then it shows you and gives you the opportunity to kind of use that to guide your review. Now, I could certainly see something like this creating an echo chamber, but I could also see this being a nice little time saver too. And this isn't too dissimilar from a lot of the technologies that we're going to start to see in our email programs like Gmail and things like that. Things that'll read the context of a message and let you just quickly respond without really having to type anything out. And these technologies are all going to be powered by different AI models. And I say different AI models because we can't really look towards GPT-4 as really being the standard for the future when we've got so many different models now that are claiming to match or even outdo what the power of GPT-4 is and does. Now, putting aside the fact that GPT-4 was trained over a year ago and still has a lot of features like multimodal support and things like that that aren't actually available for public use, we have to take that with a grain of salt when we're looking at some of these headlines. But with that said, Meta's reportedly got a new model that outdoes GPT-4. But Meta right now is in a process of gathering a ton of compute, different chips and different processors, and the training for this specific model doesn't take place until early 2024. But something that is here, right here and now, is Claude Pro, which is another option. If you are already a ChatGPT Plus subscriber, now you actually have some competition to think about. You've got the option of looking at Anthropic's Claude versus OpenAI's GPT-4. OpenAI is going to have limitations. The training data only goes up to like 2021, for example. It's not going to have as much context. But OpenAI has been a little bit more battle tested, and most likely has more relevant answers because of that. I'd mentioned in past videos that Claude, at least for myself, was one of those models that I hadn't paid a lot of attention to. But I do admit when I went back and I uploaded files to it and I actually tried it, it was very impressive and the most similar to what the GPT-4 experience was like, at least for me. The most impressive thing, just to remind you, is the 100,000 token context limit. It can essentially keep an entire novel in its RAM, so to speak, and be able to speak to you as if that is the context of the conversation. So while GPT-4 probably has an edge in shorter conversations to get quicker and more relevant responses, it would seem that Claude, over a longer span of time with that context window, might be able to do different things or have a different focus. So depending on your use cases and what you're really using these things for, they may have pros and cons to each other in that regard as well. But whether you go with Claude or you go with GPT-4, in a side-by-side comparison, they're actually relatively similar now. With the code interpreter, which is now called advanced data analysis, you can upload files. You can do the same thing with Claude. You can upload entire PDF files. For example, if you had a website that you had questions about the terms of service, you could upload the entire terms of service as a PDF document and just simply ask Claude questions about it. It should be able to interpret from that data and be able to hopefully give you a relevant response. But it's not a lawyer, so just remember that. But it gives you an idea of the power and how quickly you could get something done. I will announce the announcement of Stability AI's music generator, but I'll also announce that I haven't actually had a chance to use it myself, so I don't know the quality level of something like this. I will say that Stability AI has been impressive recently, especially with SDXL. They've been working in the background with Harmon.ai and a number of different musical type services to get this type of stuff off the ground. What they're calling stable audio is also what they're claiming the first capable tool of creating high-quality commercial use music via latent diffusion, which is the same technology that they use to create the imagery. And we saw that before with Riff Fusion, which wasn't super great, but it looks like, and as I read through this article, that harkens back to a time when we weren't as multimodal as we are now, and it looks like Stability is looking at things through a more of a multimodal lens. It says, "We started with stable diffusion and have grown to include languages, code, and now music. We believe the future of generative AI is multimodality." Soon we'll be able to talk to a generative AI model and it can create sound and music and pictures and video and all of those things from a single interface. Okay. Now this sounds a little bit less AI generated. Okay. Now here's something that's kind of cool, is because this is a tool that's just generating audio based on something that you've typed in, it can do more than just music. It can do sound effects. So for example, they've got the sound effect of a car here. They've also got the ability to do something like a drum solo. So if you wanted to use this for mixing and kind of putting songs together piece by piece, I suppose you could do something similar to that too. So options really start to open up when you look at what these tools are more and more capable of. Now, of course, this article does delve into the potential ethical and copyright quandaries, because very similar to how Stable Diffusion was built with latent diffusion, you aren't limited with what you can prompt. It doesn't look like they've put any safeguards in place to try to stop you from emulating a style that you're familiar with. Now, of course, this tool can't generate a copy, so copyright isn't really an issue. And creating a song that sounds artistically similar or has a very similar vibe or something like that isn't actually a copyright issue. I mean, just ask Ed Sheeran. Now, unlike Stable Diffusion, this isn't going to be a free release, it looks like. This, at least from what I see here, appears to be a paid service. It looks like $12 a month, and you can generate up to 500 commercial tracks up to 90 seconds long at that rate. But it does look like if you wanted to give it a shot, there's a free tier and you can make up to 20 non-commercial tracks at 20 seconds long per month. And like we've already talked about here a couple of times, Google has been in talks with UMG, or YouTube has been in talks with UMG, to create a future for AI-generated music on the YouTube platform. So if you've ever been interested in making your own music, for example, and this might be a tool that you could use to kind of put things together, maybe this is good timing. But some of the other tools and ideas of Stability AI haven't really done all that well. A lot of them have fallen flat, so we'll have to see how this ends up panning out. We'll have to see if people are willing to pay that price, or if people are willing to maybe just look at open source alternatives. Stability as a company for a long while has been looking for ways to bring in money and to look for ways to become profitable. And this may be a step in that direction. We'll have to see how it pans out. But switching gears here to our final story of the day, I want to talk about Adobe Firefly, because this is again and again a topic that I continue to talk about. As, to be honest, something that I'm kind of astounded artists have not banded together in a very public way to be very anti-Adobe. Now, to catch people up on Adobe Firefly, for those of you who don't know, this is based on Adobe stock images. It was based on photographers, it was based on art that was submitted to Adobe stock. Adobe was able to use the licensing that they already had in place to train their own diffusion model, and they created from that Adobe Firefly. It's not exactly copyright free, it's just that Adobe already owned the copyright to all of those images. And so that's the origin story of Adobe Firefly, and now it's available in Photoshop, Illustrator, and Express. But one of the most confusing things that I've seen out there is a lot of artists, especially influencer type artists that, their business is essentially teaching people how to draw in programs like Adobe. Those have been the most vocally anti-AI people that I've come across, and they have not in any way made anti-Adobe statements that I've seen. Now, I've had people here and there try to argue with me on Twitter and say that, yeah, of course, there's all these Adobe boycotts going on, but take a look at the Adobe stock price year to date. And I want you to tell me that they aren't doing incredibly well with the inclusion of generative AI. Now, Adobe's going to continue to add generative AI into their products, and personally, I think that's going to make my life easier. I don't have a problem with that. What I think is just crazy is to have an incredibly anti-AI stance and then literally tout those products and sell them to other people, essentially, rather than switching to an alternative but capable program like GIMP or Krita. Ironically, Adobe helped create the digital art scene with Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, a lot of these programs that have been around since, well, the invention of digital computer graphics. But the long and short of it is that Adobe Photoshop, the program that is used to create most of the digital art on the planet, has now involved Firefly to create over 2 billion generated images. And given that that number was only available to corporate people or to enterprise people, to beta people at this point, that number is about to get much, much higher. And that is the note that I will leave you on today. That's the food for thought. I'm very much looking forward to read your comments if you had anything important to say on any of the topics that I covered today. If you had any questions, anything like that. Your likes, comments, subscriptions, all that stuff, it means the world to me and helps the channel grow. If you like the news that I'm bringing, if you think that this would be helpful to a friend or family member, feel free to share it with them. I try to keep these videos as non-technical as I can to reach a wide audience, but also to make them as understandable as possible. But most of all, I just want to stay up to date on what's going on. The world keeps changing at this crazy pace. But on that note, thank you as always for your time here with me today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.